friends and comrades, and welcome back to another video on the MCP channel. Now these two words, conservative and communism, can they go together or are they diametrically opposed? Well, it depends what you mean by conservatism, because it's kind of a relative term depending on what you want to conserve. Obviously, if you're living in ancient Greece and you're a conservative, you want to probably conserve sodomy and all of these kind of things. But if we take it as what is commonly referring to in material reality, at least in the West, usually it means someone who is, if we say socially conservative, we mean someone who cares for the family. A lot of the time is religious, doesn't want to destroy religious institutions, values hard work, national identity, sees value in things like marriage and gender roles and traditional cultures, cuisines, art forms, all of these kind of things. And we say, well, if this is what you mean by conservative, not only is it compatible with communism, but indeed to be a conservative, we say you must be a communist. Now, as we see it, socialism is better than capitalism and communism is better still. But for the modes of production prior to capitalism, like feudalism and such, I don't think any of them were necessarily morally better or worse, only in a sense of efficiency. All of them were exploitative, don't get me wrong. They all included some sort of exploitation of labour's surplus, once whichever class is working had met their sustenance. But in like feudalism, for example, the average medieval peasant, I won't say his life was better in total because of the advances in medicine and such, but in terms of how overworked he had a better life than the average capitalist worker. And even though he gave 40% of what he'd make or whatever to his lord, he'd often he'd organise his own labour and he'd manage his own day and he'd tend to his sustenance, and then anything extra, he would send it off to his lord. But from if you're religious, from a spiritual perspective, capitalism is far more corrupt and nihilistic. Sat up there in their ivory towers, those bourgeoisie think that they have become God, and even if they pay some sort of superficial lip service to religion, they have no authentic belief in it. Similarly, for their families, corrupted by the influence of capital and private property, it all becomes about securing inheritance. Indeed, Engels says that authentic families can only be found in the working class, since they have no interest in succession and they have only themselves to give in true love. So, for what we say is that conservatives who care about religion and family really are shooting themselves in the foot when they defend capitalism, because capitalism erodes both of these things. Especially nowadays, because religion isn't a useful political tool for capitalists to poise themselves against those godless commies, even though that wasn't necessarily always true. At the start, in the early Soviet Union, yes, they were absolutely atheistic. You have the League of Militant Atheists, they're going and blowing up churches and all of that sort of thing. But that was because Lenin was a very diplomatic man, so he did a lot of things that would keep the Bolsheviks in power. And a good example of that is he created Ukraine. And we'll get into that another time, but he would do things like this. And he won the revolution because he managed to unite this sort of intellectual, over-socialized urban elites who had these destructive desires and wanted to just tear everything down and destroy the old world, and also the broad masses of peasants who just wanted a secure future and wanted the economy to be run for social ends, but they didn't want to get rid of marriage, they didn't want to get rid of religion and all of that sort of thing. So Lenin was running this very fine balance of them, but then Stalin represented the victory really of the peasants and the ordinary people. He was, this Stalin personality cult was this icon of a man of the soil, his personality was the power of the peasants and the ordinary people. Under Stalin, you saw fundamental conservatism of Russian civilization. So he did indeed, he revived the Orthodox Church, and You can say that's for political purposes or whatever. He wanted to use it against the fascists, but he did it nonetheless. And you start to see all of these movies being made about Tsars and men on horseback and the ancient conquest and all of these things about the ancient Russian culture. And Stalin was saying, this age of technical modernity that we have now, it's not a rupture with our history and our culture and our heritage of our nation in the past. It's rather a continuation of it. So that's why Stalin isn't reactionary, because he's saying that, yes, he's reconciled with modernity, but he's saying that this era of technological modernity and such is not a rupture, but it's a continuation with our ancient civilization. But then, under Khruschev, you saw a new era of religious persecution because Stalin had revived the Orthodox Church and done all of these conservative things. Under Khruschev, he saw it as part of de-Stalinization to become more socially liberal and more atheistic. So this is actually, if you have a Catholic perspective, this is the era of Russia that you might think about Russia spreading until she's consecrated to the Virgin Mary. It's this rejection of her the traditional Christian values of her origin, which you could say Stalin had revived. But then under Khrushchev, he suppresses the church, and things like abortion, contraception, all of these things start to become legalized and all of that sort of thing. Whereas Stalin was all about, banning sodomy, homosexuality. He was all about, the heroic Soviet motherhood and encouraging women to have more children and all of this sort of thing. And even if you say it's superficial for the war effort or what have you, it's undeniable that he was a conservative. He was fundamentally reviving traditional Russian conservative Christian values. And in no way was that contrary to the socialist construction. In fact, under Stalin's when the Soviet Union industrialized, so you can't really make that point. But since the fall of the Soviet Union, and indeed when most of this propaganda was being used, it was against the Khrushchevite Soviet Union, when religion was used as a propaganda tool to compare, the good Christian Americans to the evil Russian commies. But you still saw this brand of conservative communism carried out by the anti-revisionist crowd. So, figures like Chairman Mao, he did have these sort of conservative values, and although not Christian or religious, China has always been a sort of not necessarily secular, but there was always religious tolerance in China. There was never an official state religion endorsed by the government, because statehood was kind of a quasi-religion of itself. And then you'd have things like they'd have monasteries, and they'd allow Buddhist monasteries, but they'd allow like Jesuit missionaries, for example, were very good astronomers and scientists, so they would be allowed to practice Catholicism, and they'd be used in the emperor's court. So, China's context is a bit different to Russia's, but if we want to talk about socially and morally, the values that Mao implemented were very, very similar to Stalin. So sort of this pro-natalist line, and this, he wasn't for abolishing gender or marriage. In fact, one of his very first actions was to make a law which only allowed for monogamous heterosexual marriages. The divorce rate was extremely low under Mao. Sodomy was illegal in China until 1997. Unfortunately, homosexual marriages still aren't recognised today. So if we want to talk about values, Mao carried on Stalin's mantle there. But since the fall of the Soviet Union, and because China's not overly one way or another, religion isn't so much as a useful political tool for the capitalists now. So they have more or less just discarded it. So if you look at like the media now, all of the arguments aren't against godless communists. The arguments against China and such are actually based on things like violating of human rights or individual liberties or what have you. That's the new public religion now. Individual sort of Cartesian freedom. China impedes the ability to do whatever the individual wants because it's a collectivist country, and it demands that the individual submits his will to the collective good. That's the evil that they see in the socialist countries now, and that's what they present to people. Look, if you're in China, you won't just be able to pursue every whim. And guess what? That's true. But guess what? We say that's good. And as for the family, well, the bourgeoisie are quite happily to watch it burn really and die just for a short profit. They'd rather promote things like mass contraception and abortion, even if it's killing off the future workers, just so that they can increase profits now. Because workers right now will have less interruptions like maternity leave and stuff, and they'd have to pay for that. I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous, but how short-sighted really are these lot? I guess Malthus's dream has come true of a mass extermination of the parasitic working class. And of course, it's always advertised in this Malthusian way. It's like, hey, just abort your kid because, they're too poor to live a good life, so it's irresponsible of you to bring them into poverty. I mean, it's not like the poverty is the bourgeoisie's responsibility or anything like that. No. And you see, domestic labour is uncompensated for in capitalism, even though domestic labour produces immense social value. And it can properly be called work because it produces value. The value is not in the form of commodities, so it doesn't increase GDP, and hence it is of no interest to the bourgeoisie, who only care for that process of M prime, money invested into commodities and more money. That's all they care about. So domestic labour, as hard work as it is, and as much value as it produces, is not profitable value, so they don't care. And in fact, the promotion of contraception and abortion as a solution to poverty is actually quite a nice Malthusian strategy for these capitalists, because it takes the heat off them a bit, doesn't it? It allows them to shift the blame and responsibility of poverty onto the people by suggesting that, if the poor would just stop so recklessly breeding like rabbits, then everything just would balance out. It totally takes the spotlight off the real economic cause of poverty. Pushing the contraceptive agenda of the culture of death and restriction of the number of children and so-called family planning narratives is nothing but an overt attack on the poor, justifying laissez-faire policies, unquestioned continuation of exploitation and repression with no regard for the need of the people, who are simply seen as a burden to society. We think that this view is disgusting, we think it's intolerable, and we say that we can conclude that a conservative, to be a true conservative, should indeed be a communist. And if you look at the historical experience of the socialist countries of the world, the conservatives there are communists. They're the furthest left economically. The people who support the similar things like, the similar social policies like defending marriage and working against this transgenderism and all of these sorts of things are the conservatives. If you go to China, the conservatives are the hardline advocates of Mao Zedong thought. They're sort of like the old left crowd who want that Maoist aesthetic back. They want to continue the Cultural Revolution. You also have like new left figures who want the similar economic policies, but don't necessarily want to go back to Mao. But the conservatives, who support like our social policies, our view for society, are economically left. Shocking, right? Conservative communists. Who would have thought these words would go together? But if you go to somewhere like Shanghai, all of the socialised urbanite elites who watch Vice and stuff like this, who are drinking their latte, they're absolute rightists. They want their free market economics and all that sort of thing. And this very same thing is the case in Eastern Europe. Even in the countries where the communists aren't in power, all the LGBT crowd and all of this sort of thing are freaking rightists. They absolutely love the USA. They want neoliberalism, and they're socially very, very liberal. The fascists are probably going to be waving the rainbow flag. If you look at somewhere like Reddit is where fascisms are going to come from. All of these people are very, very socially liberal. Yes, indeed, but they're economically right-wing. Even if they go under progressive flags of the Democrat Party or whatever, things like the anti-China narrative, things like this, that the China fear story that makes money for weapons manufacturing companies, it's a bipartisan issue. And all of these people on Reddit, no matter how politically correct they are, they absolutely drool at the idea of going to war with China in order to save the bankrupt US economy. They absolutely love that idea. So it's not about, even though they can virtue signal about being as progressive as they want, progressive does not mean left. And in all of the socialist countries of the world, the furthest left you go, the more conservative the people are. If you want to, the people who want to conserve leftism there, or the people who also want to conserve marriage there, they want to conserve family there, they want to conserve the traditional culture. The people who want to tear everything down and just sort of have this like grey goo, boundless, limitless, just everyone's always in an orgy all the time, all of this sort of thing, they're rightists. So yes, conservative, left, communist, these words all go together, and that is absolutely what the MCP stands for. And if no one else is going to represent this position to this extent in the West, then let us do so, and we will persevere as long as it takes, no matter our size, because we cannot be in any other communist organisation unless it's going to be conservative. So that's where we stand, that's why we're the MCP, that's why we keep going, that's why we won't join anyone else. And something that you must bear in mind as well, comrades, and I say this over and over again, and you'll be sick of hearing it, but how did the bourgeoisie, the capitalists who are currently in power, how did they come to power? Well, if you look to the French Revolution, then you'll be sick of hearing this, I know, but they unleashed people's aggressive and sexual impulses to create social chaos in which they overturned feudalism and installed capitalism. So if that's how they came to power, we're not going to let it happen again so that socialists can come to power. So leftists shouldn't use this destructive, tearing everything down, unleashing your passions, and there's just going to be no discipline at all. It's just going to be complete soy rage. They shouldn't use that as a psychological appeal, because now the bourgeoisie allow people to unleash their passions in a way that's not going to be posing a threat to capitalism. So like Black Lives Matter, you can smash up and tear down and vandalise statues. Antifa, you can go and smash up people's houses and shops, and you can throw Molotov cocktails in the streets and set cars on fire. But this is no challenge to capitalism. It's just culture wars. It's not going to present any significant challenge to the base of society, to the mode of production. So this is why now in the UK we have conservative parties that advocate for things like gay marriage and transgenderism. They're conservative in an economic sense only. All they want to conserve are the profits of billionaire pedophiles. They have no interest in conserving traditional moral values, and that's where communists must step in. We must become the new conservative party, if you will, and say, look, those conservative parties are sold out. All they want to do is let people unleash their passions without challenging capitalism. We're going to be authentic conservatives in the sort of moral and ethical sense. We are going to conserve the nation's traditional culture, our cultural heritage, our national identity. We are going to conserve marriage. We are going to conserve traditional gender roles. And we're going to say, the only person saying this of a communist, there's no one in the two-party system that's going to do that. Both sides of the two-party system are quite happy to go to universities, wave the rainbow flag, and just go totally along with this morally degenerate culture. Only by joining the communists can you be a true conservative, and that should be our psychological appeal, because the working class, they are conservative. They don't care about patriarchy. They don't care about intersectional levels of oppression. They don't want to destroy marriage. If you say you want to abolish the family, you sound insane to them. You sound like a threat. They've been warned by Ben Shapiro about the Marxists who want to go on a war against the family. You're just playing straight into it. In fact, we should ground our appeal not in destruction, because that will only get us 10% of the population. That will only get us over socialised hipsters. Instead, we should put up portraits of Stalin and Mao, these men of the soil, these people who represented the peasants, the ordinary man. And even though there might be some initial opposition to that, we can explain what this is referring to in material reality. And of course, we're going to have to do some deprogramming about all the lies. But don't be a Trotskyist. Don't just go along with the lies and say, oh yeah, everything they say about the Soviet Union and China is true, but we'll just do it better because you just sound like this caricature of, oh, communism's never been tried and I'm so good I'll do it far better. We'll say, no, you've been lied to. Your history is a lie. It's false, and you don't go along with that lie. And you what you do is you defend the legacies of China. You defend the Soviet Union. You defend Mao, and you show how this is conservatism and how it links to the ordinary people, and how these great men are symbols of the ordinary people's power. And what we do is we become a populist, conservative organisation, and that is how we will appeal to working class families. So thank you all for your attention, comrades. Don't recant. Don't join one of these organisations. Don't go along with the liberalism of these fake MLs. You keep to the line of Lenin, Stalin and Mao. Keep to this sort of conservative communist line. These aren't a contradiction. Keep going, comrades. No matter how small we are, no other organisation in the West is like this. Even though there's so many in the East, so many conservative communists in the East, who in the West is saying this sort of thing? Who is saying it? We need to keep going. In spite of our size, we will endure, because who else can we join? We couldn't bear to be in any other organisation. So, thank you, comrades, and until next time, farewell.
就一定要是